Let's all rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance
I pledge allegiance
to the
flag
flag of the United States of
America
and to the
to the
republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay, President Daly,
Here.
Vice President Headland,
Here.
Trustee Clements,
Here.
Trustee McNow,
Here.
and Trustee Parr.
Here.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, guys. Our next meeting is next Tuesday. We'll be meeting with each other every Tuesday night from now at least and through June 9th. So 7 p.m. right here. My number 2 note is gone. Perhaps that's because our trustee collection is a little bit over at this point, but I'll just share that yesterday was the deadline for yesterday at 5 o'clock for Board of Education trustee petitions to be handed in. We have had 1 petition handed in by Dr. Peggy Clements. And that's where we are at for the moment. The trustee elections will take place on June 9th by absentee ballot with the rest of our budgeting vote. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Benante.
Thank you, Jen. Just a few notes from me before we go into our presentation. I know tonight's meeting is a brief agenda, so I'll try to keep my comments short, but I do want to keep the board apprised of our continued efforts and some things going on with respect to the closure of the school year under the circumstances related to the COVID crisis. First, if you're paying attention to the governor's reopening efforts, there's a state level panel, but there's also regional panels as well. And I'll be meeting with, or on a phone conference tomorrow with Mary Ellen Odell, our county executive, who's part of the regional panel, along with other superintendents from Putnam County and also town supervisors and village leaders, I believe as well. So I look forward to that and talking about our recovery efforts more locally. There's a lot of talk, I should say a lot of discussion right now going on about what we're going to do at the end of the school year with commencement exercises, with graduation. And Julia Sniffen and I are working closely on that. We have a couple of plans in place, and Julia and I are actually meeting tomorrow to go through those in a little bit more detail. And we're likely to have, a primary plan and then maybe a fallback, if you will, depending on the state of things. 5 or 6 weeks from now. So we're doing everything we can. And I know certainly Julia has this in mind to make sure that we honor our graduates in the best way we can while balancing that with public health matters, but also honoring them and their accomplishments in their school experience here and the traditions that we've all come to experience here on our campus. So you might be reading a little bit about that in the newspapers, not necessarily specific to Haldane. A lot of schools are doing their commencement planning and announcements right now. Again, we want to keep our efforts local because we think that's an important part of the Haldane experience, and we'll have more to share in the next couple of weeks on that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
moving up the 5th graders and the 8th graders, that's all included in part of that too?
My comments are more specific just to commencement. That's a good question, Margaret. What I'll say is that Ms. Jamin and Dr. Silky are also planning with respect to their respective moving up ceremonies. Those will likely look different, and I don't want to get out ahead of them, but we are planning to do something for students. But again, the form those ceremonies can take, we have to be wary, because we have to give a lot of attention right now, and we're obviously prioritizing graduation for our kids. I don't know if we're really are in any position to bring 5th graders or our 8th graders back on campus in any way for those exercises. But most importantly, Ms. Jamin and Dr. Silky are planning events for those students with their respective parent groups in a way that works for those school buildings.
Yeah, I just don't want to lose them too.
Absolutely.
The eighth graders in particular, especially if some of them will be going to different high schools next year. They're in the same boat as our seniors. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Additionally, just two other notes. As we're getting into the final quarter, we have our quarter 4 trimester 3, if you're in the elementary school, grading addendum should be coming home to families in the next couple of days. That document was, we just made a couple tweaks to it today, but that has been reviewed with faculty now, and that will go home in the next, again, couple of days. And then our school calendar is likely a topic we're going to talk about next week. Having provided a continuity of instruction through spring break, and also in anticipation of doing so, in the 2 days we had scheduled to be off prior to Memorial Day weekend, our initial calendar had Thursday and Friday as school recess days, but are no longer. We're likely at our next meeting to have to come back to the school calendar. We've received, I think, all of the guidance we're going to get on this from the governor's office and also from other agencies to make an adjustment to account for the fact that our teachers were providing continuity of instruction through those days, which means we'll have to adjust the school calendar on the back end, meaning the end of the year date, so as to not encounter an issue in going over the number of contact days that our teachers have with students, which is 180. So I'll have more to say about that next week. It's not on the agenda for tonight, but I do think it's something that you'll hear or see other districts taking action on now that I think we have all of the clarity we're going to get on that, and making adjustments to the school calendar at the end of the school year. So just the heads up is the school year is likely to end sooner than what the current calendar indicates because of those days now that we have to make up more on the contact time end. So I just wanted to mention that to the board. And again, we'll have more discussion, and probably next week would be a better space for extended discussion on that and how we're arriving at a specific date, more so than today, but a quick heads up there. And then, our recovery and reopening plans just for ourselves continue for the fall and for a variety of scenarios that we may encounter in the fall. Everything from school opening as usual to having to open in a remote or distance learning environment. So there's a lot of particulars that go into that. We're working closely with Alteris, our safety and security consultant has been very helpful. Our P&W BOCES has been very helpful regionally in just taking the guidance that we're getting wherever that's provided. Even guidance right now is there's not a lot, but what we're drawing from is the experiences that other countries have had and who are a little further along in their recovery efforts, what issues they've encountered or how they've tried to account for reopening their schools, and then anticipating what we may need to know and be able to do about that. So we can plan effectively in these next few months. When it's largely going to be just, our administrative staff and our maintenance staff on campus, we're going to lose our teachers, come summertime. So we want to make sure that we're making the best of the time we have with our full staff right now, providing whatever guidance or training that we can right now. So these are not things that we have to do at the start of next school year, to the extent that we can. So it's very busy. It has been. That's not going to change. And obviously, we have a school budget that we're preparing for as well, in a very unique circumstance. But I did want to share just those few notes with you this evening, and then we'll, Jen, if it's okay, we'll get started now in the budget discussion if there's no further questions.
Yeah, please go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So bear with me here. I just have a few slides to go through. Okay, and I'll go into budget adoption here. Okay, so much of the information that I'm going to provide this evening, the board is already familiar with. Obviously, the budget development process has been drawn out a little further with some changes due to in how we were managing the COVID crisis. So I think we had targeted May 5th as an adoption date. We're back 1 week from that. And again, relative to our timeline, we're we're still close to the initial timeline that we had set up at the beginning of the year. The budget vote has now shifted. We'll talk a little more about that as we go along. But the information, and I think the board and we've spent a good amount of time digesting this information and what we should consider in the budget development process. We'll talk about some of the dynamics at play this evening, and then I'll answer any questions that you'll have, or Ann can as well. So I'll just take you back that our budget development process really starts when we establish parameters for the administration to develop a budget back in December. So this should look very familiar to you by now. We were charged with developing a budget up to the levy limit, to the extent possible, incorporating recommendations from our coherence planning process, and again, to the extent possible, maintaining all existing programs for our students. So the administration takes that information or those parameters and then begins about a 6-week process of developing a budget to recommend to the Board of Education. So as you may recall, in January, we do a starting point for us is to talk about a rollover budget. So if we were to take everything as it currently exists and just roll that into next school year, what would the cost be to operate our school systems? And that was a figure right around $25.7 million. All things staying the same. Now we know things don't stay the same. We have folks who retire. We have some programmatic shifts that we anticipate making, but this is just a starting point to give the board an idea of what a ballpark figure of what it may cost to operate our school district the following school year. Now we know more often than not when we're rolling over, that figure is too high. It exceeds the tax levy limit, and this figure certainly did. That's about a 4.4% increase on the levy. That being said, I just want to draw your attention to that because it was a starting point in our budget discussions. Now, through the development process, we arrived at a recommended budget of $25.26 million. So we had about a $400,000 deficit if you were to use our rollover as a starting point that we sought to reduce. And we ultimately arrived at this figure. This would reflect an approximate 2.7% increase year over year, what our budget was this school year to what our anticipated budget would be next school year, which would be a 3.29% increase to the tax levy. And as you're familiar with, our budget is organized into 3 components. We have an administrative component, a capital component, and a program component. And these charts should, again, look very familiar to you. And I'm just going to reorient my screen here so I can see you and I can see these. And we've tried to provide an overview here of what our spending has been in these areas in previous years. Just for sake of this chart in the slide deck, we can only go back so far while making this readable, but you can get a sense for what our spending was last school year in each element on the administrative end, where we're projected to come in this school year, and what we're proposing for the upcoming school year. And I just want to, again, draw your attention down to the lower right-hand corner of these charts where there's a 2 or 3 relevant figures. The percent change, so what we're proposing over what was budgeted for this school year, and then what percentage of the total budget is this component. So the administrative component is the smallest of the 3 components of our budget. It comprises for about 12% of our total spending. The capital component would be the next largest chunk, if you will, of our budget. And here is an overview of our capital costs that are proposed for the upcoming school year. And then the most significant part of our budget is the program piece, which comprises nearly 3/4 of our budget. And you can see this involves primarily our teaching and learning component, as well as pupil personnel services. So again, these are figures that I know the board has seen and worked with for the last 2 months since we initially presented the administration's recommendation in early March. It's hard to believe it's been 2 months since that. It seems like it was a world ago, but a lot has happened since that time. That being said, I think what we have arrived at is that it would be very difficult now, given some of the unknowns related to state aid, to reduce the levy in any way. And we can talk about that in just a moment or two. So I just do want to just further talk through some of the shifts that were made to resolve or to bring the budget in balance. So I alluded to the budget deficit being somewhere around $400,000 from where we were rolling over to the budget that we could develop for next school year and still be within the levy limit. So this is just an overview of that specific figure. And this was a bit more detail that, quite frankly, I did not provide in my initial presentation, but I think was important for the board to see presented separately. So it is here. On the admin component, these are some shifts that we've made in our proposed spending in that area. First of all, and I'll just talk through this line by line. This school year, we had a good level of support provided or included in the budget in curriculum and instruction support through BOCES. And that total cost came to close to $120,000. So in next year's budget, we're proposing removing that cost, but at the same time, establishing our own support in curriculum for next school year. I want to talk about this in a little more detail. I would not advocate on July 1 or after the budget were to pass that we go out and we hire a director of curriculum right now. As I said, a lot's changed since March, and I don't think that the timing is good to draw a quality candidate into this position. I still think we should budget for it because I do think I'm hopeful that there is a time next school year where it will be better to seek a candidate for a director of curriculum position. But I would like to recommend that we continue to, what we're not spending in our own position, we continue to continue with subscribing with BOCES for curriculum support to fill that gap, however long that may be. We're limited with BOCES in that we cannot bring a person on for any more than half time. So that's obviously how we've been working this school year, and it works. It's not ideal, but it works. Judy's done a great job, especially over these last couple months with our staff. But I would recommend we continue with BOCES in that manner until it's a better time to hire for our own position. So next year, we won't spend any more than what we've budgeted for. It will just be a shift that at some point we may make in the school year when the timing's better to shift from BOCES support to hiring our own person. Now, these other reductions that you see, G&R, other consultant costs, we utilize BOCES or contracted service through BOCES for a lot of staff development needs. We do feel that by having our own person in-house, we're in a better position to meet some of those staff development needs that we have across our district. So that's why you're seeing reductions there in those areas. I also mentioned a reduction in clerical support earlier this school year. That's where we would show that reduction, the shared clerical. As Ann may have alluded to, again, months ago, we did have a rate adjustment through the teacher's retirement system that was beneficial to us. And again, some related benefits to any staff changes. We're anticipating an increase in costs there, but total net from what our rollover was to now, what we're proposing is $28,000, almost $29,000 difference in reducing that gap that we spoke of. I'll pause right here in case there's any questions about curriculum leadership or consultant costs. Now would be a good time to discuss those.
I do have a question. So if we get a new director of curriculum halfway through, Are we committed to that, the payment to BOCES, or don't we pay them one chunk for the year?
In certain areas we do. This is not one where we do BOCES.
So we just pay until we're done?
Yeah, it's a monthly payment based on days that individual would work with us.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll move along. And obviously we can come back to any of this as we feel the need to. And on the capital component, we're realizing savings in maintenance salaries just through positions that we have not hired for and do not anticipate filling in the near future. So there will be some additional savings there. Perhaps one of the more significant reductions in our proposal is to reduce the school peace officer position. As you may recall, this was a position that was added into our budget, I believe, 2 years ago. I'm sorry, confusing school. We had the SPO in place last school year, was the first year. I'm just thinking back though in school years when it was discussed. And then the related benefits savings for, again, more related to the hiring or the hold on hiring for a maintenance position is there as well. So from rollover to the proposal, this accounts for $61,000 in reduced costs on the capital end. And again, I'll pause there for a minute if there's any questions.
Nope.
Okay. Now on the program component, again, the program piece is the largest component of our spending. So if we're looking for some efficiencies, there's in spending, that's a good place to look. So you'll see here, we realize a significant reduction, or I hesitate to call it savings, just spending less due to retirement breakage. We do have several retirees this school year. Contractual changes that we've made. We spoke of this back in March, a few minor changes at the building level. So homework help reduction, not eliminating it, but just reducing the number of days that we pay for homework help at the elementary level. We do feel that we can continue to realize some efficiencies in scheduling and reduce the 6-period assignments that often come before you in the summer for approval. Project-based learning supplies, we realize a reduction there, an area we had not been spending in significantly. Tuition costs related to special education through our planning through the winter months, and even we've held on to that through the spring. We're anticipating a reduced amount of spending there for tuition costs, that is. We probably will need to increase on the career tech opportunities we have for our students who go to BOCES, which is a good thing. We want to make sure that programming is available to our kids. We had some breakage and guidance on a leave of absence piece there that we anticipate going into next school year. Reduction in intramurals, again, another rate adjustment on TRS there on the program end as opposed to the admin end because we have employees who are in both, so you can see it in both spots. And then a slight an increase in cost, excuse me, on staff changes related to benefits. But that's where the bulk of balancing that budget came from, addressing program-related savings or efficiencies. Okay. So the last 2 months have presented a very unique variable to consider in the budget development process. We have every indication that we're going to have a reduction in state aid. What form that takes and how much is still to be determined. And last meeting or 2 meetings ago, I know we've been meeting a lot recently, we talked about the measurement period where state aid our state aid could be adjusted, and the first measurement period just having concluded at the end of April. So we don't have yet a figure of what reductions or adjustments will be made based on that measurement period. We do believe we will have something by May 15th, so just a couple of days from now. So it may, it may be necessary, obviously, and it's likely to be necessary to examine how we're going to address a reduction in revenue, because we count our state aid as revenue when we get this additional information from the state. We receive approximately $2 million from New York State in aid for our schools. So you figure a $25 million budget, $2 million of it comes from New York State. So as a total or a proportion of our total budget, it's not a lot compared to other districts. So in some ways we're in a better spot simply because of that. Some districts, their budgets are funded 30, 40%, even more than that in some districts by that state aid allocation. We're not, we're about 8%. So a reduction in state aid for us it's a big deal. It's not perhaps as significant as it may be in another school district, but it's a big deal nonetheless. We're counting on that for revenue, and we'll see what modifications we have to make to the budget based on any significant shift of that aid allocation. So I would say that this is good reason, or further illustrates why we should be developing a budget up to the levy limit, because one of our revenue streams right now that sits outside of what we can generate locally is in jeopardy or at risk. So we can't really go any further on the levy. I mean, we could, but we don't want to. We're already at 3.3%. So, my hope is that whatever that reduction is, it allows us to hold on to the things that we want to include in next year's budget in the way we want to include them. But even though the board is adopting a budget this evening, I can understand where it may come with a sense of reservations about, well, do we really know what or how our school is going to be impacted with this state aid figure in somewhat in flux? And the answer is not really. I'd say what 92% of our school district is gonna look like next year, but that 8% that we kind of attribute and utilize to run our district, we're gonna have to keep that in mind as we go through this next week, and then the other measurement periods that follow. So there's 2 other measurement periods, so 2 other points in time through next school year where our anticipated revenue that should be coming in could be adjusted. So that's just something, in a matter of full candor that we all need to be aware of in these next couple of weeks, and then in the months that follow. Now, I'd be remiss if I just didn't mention there's a second proposition in the budget, which is student transportation. This generally is budget neutral, or tax neutral, I should say, excuse me, in that we're paying off debt that we have because we do this on a cycle for some of our vehicles, as we're now assuming new debt for new vehicles. So we're taking vehicles off as we're bringing vehicles on. So again, this tends to result in very little additional taxes, if any at all. So we're looking to replace 1 bus and 1 smaller bus or van next school year, and we finance these over 5 years. That concludes my summary for this evening for the board. During the public hearing, I'll likely go into a little more detail on some of these revenue streams, but again, out of respect for your time, and again, the few months now that we've spent talking about this, I did not include any other slides. Just one last thing in closing, that is, all things staying the same to the extent possible. This budget will maintain all existing programs and services for our students. It does continue a level of support for our teachers and principals in curriculum and instruction. That support's been very helpful for us over the course of the school year, but really no better exemplified in these last few months. And then I think what we don't want to lose is that we're getting ready to embark on a major coherence planning initiative next school year. And I think that the things we're trying to keep in place for our schools right now establishes us and maintains a level of readiness for the first phase of our coherence planning process. Whether our kids are working remotely at home, or whether we hope whether they're on our campus, but either way, our goals for our kids are going to remain the same, and we need to lean into that this summer, whether it be the last few weeks of the school year or into the summer, and certainly at the start of next school year, that as we launch our coherence plan, whether our kids are working digitally or they're working, beside our teachers, physically beside our teachers, we have goals that we've established and articulated for our kids, and we want to make sure we're ready to meet those goals in whatever environment that our kids are learning in. So this budget, as it stands right now, keeps those things in place. And just one last thing I'll say, this whole matter over the last few months has really, I think, illustrated the importance of having strong public institutions, and our schools being one of them. And at some point we'll be back. I've said that before, and I'm encouraged that things are moving in a positive direction, that we're starting to see, or we'll begin to see in the coming months, a return to some of the things that we enjoyed prior to March 15th. And one of those things is our local public school. Haldane has an outstanding reputation in our community. It's something that our community has come to rely upon, not just for the education of their students, but for to foster the social relationships that our students have, and to foster the greater relationships that they develop and their families develop in our school community. It was excellent before. We want that to be excellent when everybody returns as well, and I think we want to maintain a level of excellence in our public schools for not just for our kids, but for our community, for when we are out of this crisis. So with that, that concludes my formal presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Anne obviously is online as well, and will, and before we move on.
So this is material we've all been sitting with for a while now, but questions for Dr. Benante or Anne, anybody? No questions.
No real
We're
questions.
all pretty clear, right? We've been talking about it. Yeah, we've been talking about it for a while. I'll just share that I've used this word before, and when I've been thinking about this budget, I've been thinking about what keeps us the most flexible. Because there are so many uncertainties, and I think the best thing to do when you have uncertainties is to have flexibility. And I think that this budget gives us as much flexibility as we can have. And even that's not very much, but it's as much as we can have. So I really support the budget. I feel like it's a good demonstration of everything that we've asked the administration to come up with, both pre-crisis, but also post-crisis. I mean, I think our goals, as we've circled around in discussion, but I think our goals remain the same. And I think Anne and Dr. Benante have turned over every rock and have come up with a comprehensive budget that really, I think, does what we need it to do for our the future of our school.
Jen,
Go ahead,
you and I talked this afternoon. So I was asking the questions. This is an economy that we've never dealt with before. We have no idea how much state aid is actually going to come through. We're doing a lot of this blindly. If this doesn't pass, because we are asking a lot of a community that, there's whatever percentage that is completely unemployed at this point. But in our heads, we are saying, yes, but one of the really important things we need to do is keep a really good school district, because that will keep our property values up. That is, our kids are our most important things, all of that. So, but if that doesn't pass, what are the next steps in terms of this has been pushed back? Like, what's the timeline? Do we have a second chance, or does it automatically go to zero? I think all of those things are things that we need to talk about.
Yeah, so Margaret, just given the nature of the absentee ballot system and what it entails, I am, and Ann, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't, I don't believe we are of the impression that we could facilitate a second budget vote, which means if the budget does not pass, we would have to go to a contingency budget, which would be setting the levy at zero. And that would result in an approximate and $600,000 in further reductions that we would have to make if I'm
650,000, actually, yes.
$650,000.
Yeah.
So
Before
we got one shot.
state aid.
Correct.
Before
So-
state aid.
Yep. So double whammy, Margaret. There, you'll have. We're already anticipating a reduction on the state aid end, but that $650,000 reduction doesn't even take that into consideration.
Right.
So. Yeah, it's significant, and that's one of the criticisms you will hear about this budget development process that we now have to go through with the absentee ballot method, the timing of it, and the nature of what it takes to generate an absentee ballot, an accounting system for that. That there's no way we could do that twice. So we essentially lost our ability to have a second budget vote, because if the budget were to fail, and again, I'm not wary of, I know it's happened in the past, but it happened a long time in the past. Generally you would put a second budget before the community for vote that third week of June and try to strike a fair balance between where you were and whatever that contingency ballot is based on, maybe what you heard or what you were hearing from community members. So we will not have the opportunity to do that. There's just no way if it had to happen through an absentee ballot process.
Right.
And have we gotten firm guidance that's, or has there just been no guidance? So we're assuming. It's more that there's been no guidance, right?
Correct.
So the state hasn't come out and said, you don't get a second chance. They just
No.
haven't created any next step possibility. So we're assuming that there isn't a second chance, but that hasn't been officially said.
Correct.
That's what I understand, yeah.
What's the deadline for actually, sorry to interrupt, what's the deadline for actually having the budget adopted? Is it July 1st?
And so after it's been voted upon, John?
Yes, so.
'Cause you have to accept the results of the budget.
Yep.
But I think there are some statute requirements there I'd have to check on. I don't know if it's July 1, John. I think it's actually before that.
Well, yeah, just so administratively, you get the votes back, you'd have to turn around, kick out more absentee ballots to everybody.
Yes.
Get them time to have a revised budget, propose the budget out, get the absentee ballots out again, get them back in again. Yeah, just the timing with the statutory requirements for the budget is
Right. Well,
super
we
tight.
start having expenses on July 1st. But I mean, in this time, anything is possible. If the governor, writes another executive order that he's going to allow a second vote, but he's been silent on it. So there's no provision for it right now. And the date is June 9th that everyone has to vote on that day. So after that, there's just, no guidance at all.
Yeah, and I think that Margaret's point is an important one that we really do need, right? And we're come at the budget process in a way that we never have before, right? We don't have the ability to talk to people on the blacktop. We don't have the ability to talk to people at the sporting events or at the grocery store. We don't have that ability to talk to them, to remind them to vote, to answer quick questions. So we're going to have to do reaching out in a way that we haven't done before. And I know Dr. Benante is already thinking through that, and we've been talking about that. So it will be important that we really get the message out really clearly to get people to support the budget.
Yeah, that was part of the impetus, Jen, if I can just interject, of putting it before the board tonight as opposed to next week. We still could have done it, I think, next week. It would have been the last day. But that's a week that we then lost to communicate. And I would err right now on having more time to communicate the budget and connect with groups or people, in whatever way, than to, wait a week and considering the amount of time that we've had already to kind of examine and discuss the variables that are at play.
Remind me of the because I know I should know this, and I apologize. Remind me of the legal requirements, or what the board can and cannot do in terms of advocating for the budget once we have recommended it.
The board can, obviously, by way of your vote tonight, is supporting
Sure.
the recommendation. So it is not an issue for a board member to vocalize or voice their support for why they supported the budget, if you choose to do so tonight. That's not a concern.
Right.
The issue becomes using any school resource to actively to do some sort of like get out the vote campaign.
Okay.
So we have to be wary of using public funds to openly promote, voting yes.
Yep.
In any way.
That's fair. Yeah, I knew there was something.
Which is why we turn to our supporting organizations. They can. So there's nothing to stop the PTA, our labor associations, the faculty association, the CSEA. They all can. And that's why we consider all of those groups partners in our work, because they play an important role in vocalizing that support among their constituent groups.
Well, I will go on record and vocalize my support. I think it's, but seriously, this is, I've been incredibly impressed by what I've seen from the teachers for my children. I've been incredibly impressed what I've seen from the administration that I've talked to and reached out to. And I realize that this is a challenging time for everyone. I was on the phone today with a woman that I work with who is homeschooling 3 kids while working, and it's an incredible realization of the quality, the time, and the investment that our school system provides to our children and to our community. There was for those of you who haven't seen one of the many pieces of content streaming around on the web these days, the guy, I can never remember his name, the guy who used to be in The Office, John Krasinski or something like this, does a short called Some Good News, which is fantastic because it's all just good stuff. They said, I think teachers should be paid $1 million a day because he'd been teaching his kid for like a week. And he's like, it's a real appreciation for the time, the dedication that needs to go into helping our kids be successful. And I do believe that this is a vote for not only right now to meet the challenges that we know we're going to have in the fall, but a vote for what happens 3, 5, 10 years down the road and where we're trying to go as a school, as a district, and as a community. So I'm certainly in favor.
And I said this before, I think the first time right after we were beginning to understand the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on school closures and on the economy. And, at the risk of repeating myself, everything we know indicates that our children are going to come back to us in the fall with greater needs, the greater learning needs. Children have lost months of instruction, even though we know teachers are working so hard and we know parents are working so hard. There hasn't been the kind of systematic instruction that we know really benefits learning. And, we we also know that this has been and will likely continue to be stressful for children. I think I don't know, you know, I think definitely within the capacity of our teachers to, to handle, but really the needs will be greater. They won't be less. And also we have these really exciting, things planned for the future. So I understand. I understand why some people may wonder about this decision, but I know I just want to make sure that, that I have the opportunities or take the opportunities to really advocate just so strongly for what we're doing and how important Haldane is to our kids and to the community.
I think one of the important things, so when we talked about it before and then we said, all right, maybe we should drop down to 2.2. And I actually didn't realize that we had gone back to going to 3.3. But the numbers going down to 2.2 really are minimal per household, but it is a significant number for the school budget once you put everybody's $25 together. And I think that's kind of how we have to pitch this, that we need, it wasn't enough to cut down to 2.2 because we need that cumulative money to make a bigger difference on our end, especially if we are looking at losing the state aid because we don't know how much we're losing there. So to me, I was like, can we go middle of the road to make sure that we pass this? But I think we do have to go all or nothing, because we have to just give the biggest pitch to get this passed, because the 2.2 wasn't going to make that big a difference in terms of, okay, I will say, yes, I'll agree to 2.2, but I won't agree to 3.3. But the 2.2 in the end really was only $100,000. Is that what it was, Phil? I think that was a really key screen.
If I'm not mistaken, Ann, $200,000 for every 1%. Correct. Yeah. So $200,000, Margaret.
Yeah.
But what Margaret is something that Phil and I have talked included in the budget newsletter is like a chart where it shows people, how much this really means dollars and cents wise, because that is the point that the burden on the taxpayer, that isn't that significant compared to the loss that the school district would feel if we didn't go up to the levy limit.
Well, I've certainly been persuaded by the four of you as to what my vote is going to be this evening. And I feel like all along, I felt like as the newest member of the board, all of my questions about this process have been really addressed in a timely and really informative and efficient way. And I feel like as a member of the community who came into this with the least amount of knowledge and been able to really follow this step by step, I really feel like I've come to understand a narrative sense of why this is the right budget for us moving forward. And as a person, in my, speaking quite frankly, between now and the end of the year, the person who has lost income and will probably continue to struggle a little bit until things in my industry start to come back in a way. And as I'm looking towards tightening the budget and figuring out how I'm going to get to the end of the year, I know that at the very top of my priorities is my investment, whatever it may be and whatever it can be, in that part of our community that we will continue to be proud of to the end of the year, even as so many things in our community, we can see so much change as our local businesses are transforming and changing, and as municipalities are struggling in one way or another, and other institutions are. I think we're going to be really encouraged when we return in the fall with a renewed commitment to the school and see our kids thriving, and giving them the opportunity to do so. So I think that's why we should move Straight ahead.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a sell, but I think all of us as a team need to really pitch, because the alternative is not good. The alternative is not good.
Agreed. So Phil, it sounds like you have agreement from the board.
Great. Jen, I appreciate the board's support. I know this is one of the more complicated budget scenarios that I've been a part of, and I've been a part of many. And it's eerily, reminiscent in many ways of back in the period of time after the financial crisis in the late 2000s. And that's why we say we're not sure what form this may take, because okay, there's a reduction in state aid, but as Ann can tell you, that took a very unique form for 5 years, if not, right around there, after the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008. But the nature of this crisis is really unique. So I appreciate the board's patience, your flexibility. The board continues to ask really good questions, and it's helpful to me and Ann and the rest of our administration as we deliberate on what we think strikes the right balance between, our community's values for our schools and, and providing a sound education for our kids of our community. So thank you for that. And Jen, I think at this point, it's back to you, and we have this on the agenda for this evening. Oh, Jen, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the property tax card. Not sure what we're doing with that. Do we need to approve it?
And do you have any background you want to provide on the property tax report card? I know we have a responsibility to do this. But can you provide a little bit of background on what it constitutes and what it reflects at this point in time?
Sure. The property tax report card is something that we file annually the day after the budget's adopted, and it gives a lot of the information that's related to the tax levy limit form that also gets submitted. It's the proposed budget, the proposed levy limit, and starting last year or even the year before, but it's just the last couple of years where we have to detail the reserves that we have and the changes in the reserve, anything that we are proposing. So based on fund balance projection, after putting the school lunch fund deficit aside, because that's not something that's reported on the property tax report card, I went with the reserves that we had been talking about, and which are the TRS contribution reserve, perhaps putting some funding towards the tax levy, and that we're not going to decide until August. All of that's there for 2021 is an estimate, and there's nothing that we're committing to by doing that. Also, I put on here just knowing that down the line, as the superintendent had touched on, that this is probably not going to be a 1-year effect that we're going to feel as far as our revenues go and our expenses. For instance, next year, I would anticipate that the school lunch deficit would be even higher, because now we don't have revenue from the middle of March till the end of June. So we have to keep that in mind also, but we're still paying. We're paying for food, that we are distributing. We're paying for salaries and we're paying for benefits. We are getting some reimbursement from the state for the lunches that we are providing, but not anywhere near what we would get operating the cafeteria for the school lunch program. So just keeping those things in mind, we're going to feel the effects for years to come. And again, we don't even know what our state aid elimination adjustments might be going forward. So keeping that in mind, I had some funding that I suggested for unemployment insurance, not knowing what that might bring for the next couple of
Right.
years. Funding the retirement reserves because the revenue in those accounts could go down in the state, therefore increasing our contribution. Sorry. And basically
Is that a no
that's it.
vote?
Oh, that's a resounding yes.
And basically that's it. That's your property tax report card and in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Is there any questions for Anne? We're going to approve that later, or it'll be up for our approval later in the meeting. Okay. So we go into our communication from the public. If anybody would like to communicate with us at this time, you can do so via chat, and we will address your questions or comments in the next communication from the public section of the meeting. And now we're going into our new business. So this is the approval to adopt the proposed budget. So I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the proposed Haldane School District budget for 2020-2021 in the amount of $25,266,610 as indicated in Proposition 1 to be presented to the voters of the Haldane Central School District via absentee ballot at the annual district meeting on Tuesday, June 9th, 2020.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? This, although Catherine's statement read Proposition 1, that defaults to both Propositions 1 and 2. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's
Aye.
I need
No, it's a roll call.
I need
Oh,
a
that's
roll
right.
call vote.
That's
Oh,
right.
sorry.
Oh, of course.
Sorry.
President Daly,
Yes.
Vice President Headland,
Yes.
Trustee Clements,
Yes.
Trustee McNow,
Yes.
and Trustee Parr.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The approval of the progress report card. Catherine.
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the property tax report card for 2020 prepared by Ms. Ann Dinio, Business Manager.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Is there any communication from the public? Did anyone see any chats coming in that we need to discuss? No. Okay. Board reflections. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? Nope. Dr. Benante, anything you'd like to share?
Just a reminder that we're meeting Tuesday night. We likely will need an exec session prior to our next meeting. I mentioned that in the Friday report. So I'll get back to the board just in confirming that time with Mr. Lambert. Beyond that, I'll save my comments for next Tuesday.
Okay. Then I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
everybody.
night.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.